everybody, and welcome to the Best Practices in Human Resources podcast. For the first time, I am not stuck in the little closet of an office behind a microphone with a dog chewing on my arm. I'm actually here for the 100th episode, and we're here in Chino Hills, California. It's a big monument, big milestone episode, and I am so excited to be here. And we're interviewing Bedros Keuilian today, who is a powerhouse of a CEO, and his graciousness, and they invited us in to do this for a big milestone. So thank you very much.
Well, first off, congratulations.
Thank you.
On 100 episodes. I did not know that.
Yeah.
I feel like now I have to live to a higher standard. And thank you for coming out and having me on your show.
Yeah, I appreciate it. This is awesome. This
is
great.
We built out quite the studio, so I'm glad we get to use it with you.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you're using it too. That's awesome. So would you please do me a favor? I know a lot about you because I follow you.
Sure.
We've communicated. But would you please help people understand a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so my background's a little different than the average person. I'm an immigrant to the United States, for one. My family and I escaped the Soviet Union in 1980 when I was 6 years old and came to the United States as political refugees. My dad was a member of the Communist Party. And his whole thing was, even though he was a member of the Communist Party, he loved the idea of freedom, of democracy, of capitalism. And so we came to the United States, and his whole thing was that I'm going to work and I'm going to live the American dream with my family. And he raised us, when I say us, myself and older brother, older sister, with the idea of you can become and do anything you want so long as you help the people around you. And years later, I realized that was a Zig Ziglar quote as well, as you can get everything you want in life as long as you help enough people get what they want. And so I grew up with that mindset of service and helping others, and I kind of got into the fitness world through just being a fat kid throughout elementary school and high school, and I couldn't find a date for prom. So senior year of high school, the only thing that motivated me to work out was this girl. I wanted to ask her to the prom. Her name was Nikaya. So I lost like 20 pounds, 25 pounds, and I thought, that would be it. She'd say yes. The thing was I was too nervous to ask her, so I never made it to the prom, which was okay because I realized fitness was my passion. And so I kind of, from there, went and got certified after high school and had multiple jobs. I mean, worked at Disneyland as a fry cook, was a part-time trainer at a big box gym. And then on the weekends, I was a bouncer at a bar because I didn't have enough money to make ends meet. But you fast forward a decade or so, then I had my own gyms. I was coaching and consulting other personal trainers. And then you fast forward another decade, and our franchise, Fit Body Boot Camp, came to be at around 2010. And that was pretty neat because the housing market had crashed in 2008.
Yep.
And so, people couldn't afford one-on-one personal training. It was too expensive. So I got this goofy idea that if we took the outdoor boot camp that happens in parks and we bring it indoors, we could make it weatherproof, right? They could do it in Virginia, they could do it in California, and anywhere in between.
That's right.
And so now it's become an international franchise with hundreds of locations worldwide, and I've got an HR department. Yeah. So it turns out humans have emotions, and they have insecurities, and they have needs and wants, and I thought everybody would come in here and just charge ahead. So it's been quite the experience growing into a leader and understanding. It really is like the term HR, you never really think about it until you're in my seat.
Yeah.
And you realize that every human is a resource.
Totally.
It's an actual resource, no different than Google is a resource and Facebook is a resource. And then you have to realize that those resources do have needs, emotions, and wants, and how do I work with them? So there I am.
Yeah, there's a big learning curve going through all of that, as most people are. And, that's the thing about, HR. And this is perfect because a lot of up-and-coming entrepreneurs, a lot of up-and-coming business leaders, they know HR is important. And I've heard you even say this on your podcast, on the Empire Show. We know it's important, and you have to do it. And that's where it stops, right?
Yeah.
That's always where it stops. So you have these HR professionals that come in, or people that I refer to them as champions, who are themselves an up-and-coming in the HR field, right? Because they're championing the cause. But the only thing that they know how to do is incite fear in the leader's eyes to get them to snap out and work through that. So with a high-performing CEO like you, I thought this was a great opportunity to kind of talk, see how HR and CEOs can come together and actually build a really good relationship. Because in our world, our credentialing, our resources, magazine articles, all this stuff that they always say it, but nobody really actually kind of breaks it down. And I think it kind of struck this idea is that between the two of us bouncing off, because again, I pretty much know where you're going with a lot of things just based off of your success levels.
Sure.
And at the level that I've played off, that we could probably help some people out, including any other business leaders who are actually listening to this today.
And listen, as someone who has now, this is so weird, right? I mean, here we are in 2021 now, and around 2015, we started hitting we started having hockey stick years where we hit the Inc. 500 list, Inc. 5000 list, Entrepreneur Magazine's top 200 fastest growing franchises. And so our team's growing, our franchise is growing, the brand is growing, and with that, the problems grow as well. And quite frankly, the HR leader that I have now is my second HR person. Previous to that, I had another HR person, great human being. But what I've noticed is that most leaders and CEOs want to charge ahead.
Totally.
And then we'll figure it out as we go. And typically it's the team behind you who figures it out and takes the chaos and puts some kind of sense to it. HR, on the other hand, wants to figure it all out and then charge ahead. That creates a very adversarial relationship.
Yes, it does.
And as I now can sit back and put myself in your shoes that as HR, you're like, look, you hired me to keep you away from lawsuits, to make sure that you're complying to state, federal regulations. Like, I want to do my job, but now we're having confrontation.
Yeah.
I think the best thing, in my opinion, that a leader like me could do is really explain, and I didn't do that the first time around, to the head of HR, here's my vision. I'm an eagle. So here's another thing. I'm an eagle, I'm flying. Have you heard of, well, you're very familiar, I'm sure, with the DISC assessment.
Oh, very much
right?
so.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's a company out there called Taking Flight, and we hired them to come in here and basically do that personality test for us.
Yep.
But instead of the letters of D-I-S-C, whatever, they assign a bird to your personality. So I'm a high eagle, I'm a driver.
Yep.
And then there's the doves, the caretakers and supporters. And then there's the owls who want to cross T's and dot I's, and she described them as they are the brakes in a business.
Yep.
They're always trying to pump the brakes. And then there's the parrots, the kind of outgoing and right. And so as I see that, as we're sitting in the other room in my building here, and I've got all my team there, and everyone's kind of broken down into, oh, that's an owl, that's the eagle table, that's the whatever. I realize, oh my gosh, the people that I'm thinking I have the most friction with, they're sitting in that dove and owl tables. They're just supporters. They're doing what I've hired them to do, yet I'm having this confrontation with them.
Right.
So what I found is, as the second time around with an HR person, after we parted ways with our first, like, here's my vision, and I'm an eagle, I'm a driver, but I don't want to end up in jail. I don't want to drive myself to jail or to a court hearing or any kind of litigation. So with that in mind, I'm willing to operate in the gray, but I'm not going to go to the dark gray, but we're not going to be solid white either.
Right.
And so once I set those expectations, I said, now let's communicate. We had a much better relationship than the first time around.
Yep, that's awesome. And here's the really cool thing. I'm listening to this analogy that you're using with the birds, right? Every one of those birds has a different view of the world and of the business. So the eagle is flying at that very, very high altitude. You can see the horizon, you can see the path forward. You're not looking at the details, even though your eyesight's really sharp still, right? You're not looking at the details. But when you have those doves, they're only going to be a couple hundred feet up off the ground. They're only going to be the ones who are, really attentive to the details, making sure that things get done. They are your steady eddies, right?
Steady eddies.
Your steady eddies. Your owls are the ones who they take that moment and pause and they think through things, and then they move forward.
Yeah.
Right? So it's really interesting. I have the same kind of analogy I use with airplanes, right? When you fly at 30,000 feet, you see the same thing. Your people are going to fly at about 5,000 feet, and then your managers are going to elevate anywhere between 20 to 10.
Sure. That's a good way to draw that picture.
Yeah. So that's the dynamic that we have to figure out together when we work together. Now, here's the other dynamic. and this is for people who don't really quite yet know how to do this. How does an HR person jump in front of the freight train that is Bedros who wants to move forward? And you've got an awesome analogy, and I've actually written about this. You put out an email about the 70-40 rule and about how, if you could explain that really quick, then I'll tag on my segment of it.
Sure. So let's give credit where credit is due. The 70-40 rule is by General Colin Powell.
Yep.
In his book, he talks about, he says, look, as a decision maker, as a leader, as a general, I just need as little as 40% of the information, and I can execute on a decision. May not be the right decision, and if it's not, I can course correct.
Absolutely.
And I need as much as 70% to execute. Meaning, if the rest of the owls and doves are looking for 100% of the facts before we can execute, I'm going to be already halfway down the street.
Yeah, totally.
Right? And so that 40-70 rule is so important that you need as little as 40% of the information. The rest you'll figure out as you go, and you may have to course correct. And I'll need as much as 70%, and I'm ready to execute. Because 100% perfect never exists. We live in a place where we have to take imperfect action.
Absolutely.
And so I love that mentality. And when I read that in his book, I was like, oh man, that really explains how I operate. And I started sharing that with my team so that they can kind of get on board. Because otherwise it looks like the boss is being chaotic. Like,
right, yeah.
Right? Because when I put myself in their shoes, it's like, we don't have all the information. How are we making these decisions? We'll figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah, because your number one responsibility as a business owner is to make payroll.
Yes.
It's not profit, it's to keep the doors open because you have X number of people in your company you have to take care of.
Correct.
So the 70-40 rule, I love that. And then I actually wrote about it in my audience. I took a lot of what you did and I said, however, when it comes to HR, we can't execute on 70%. And there's a reason why. I'm a business owner. I've got 3 businesses that I'm building, including, all of this. So I get it and I appreciate that. But I also understand from an HR perspective that if you don't step back for a minute and partner with your HR and say, this is what I need to do, here's my timeline, here's where I have to execute, or I've already done it and I may not have taken some things into consideration, what do we need to do to shore things up? That communication doesn't exist. Companies may have inadvertently already, there's 2 different types of bad actions, right? There's adverse impact and adverse action. Adverse impact means that on the surface, the company's doing what they think is in the best interest of everything, but there's a detail in there that may have opened them up or likely has opened them up to some form of discrimination or employment violation, right? An adverse action is a very specific knowing activity. You could terminate somebody. That's adverse action. It doesn't mean that you've discriminated or caused anything. It just means that you've done a knowing action. So when you have leaders that move quickly, and then they walk into the, the office of the HR and say, hey, guess what? We've done this. And we go, because it plucks our HR nerve. We know that there's something in there that's probably adverse.
Sure.
But we're not 100% sure what it is unless we get those details.
Right.
Now we're in that scrambling thing, right? So that's a breakdown that can occur. But it's also something that has to happen. I mean, we've seen, pivoting in this pandemic has been crazy. And this is a really great example. We've got, immunity that's coming out. We've got people that are about ready to, get the vaccine. They're working on that. If companies don't fully think through that, and you're here in California, so there's some privacy issues to take into consideration, although in the best interest that may have been coming out from the CEO to the rest of the team, there could be some major violations, especially when you're not paying attention to what's going on with religion. You're not paying attention to what's going on with people who have disability. What about people who don't believe in it? What about people who are not willing to come out and have those conversations because the company doesn't have a legal right to know that? Mm-hmm. So it's very complex. So not having these kinds of conversations can open up. And my job as an HR pro, my number one job is to protect you as the CEO.
Yeah, isn't that weird? Because even though that's the number one job, I found, just asking with a lot of my entrepreneur friends, that there's some tension and friction amongst that top line leader and the HR pro. And I think the communication is what's missing.
Totally.
And then the shared vision.
Yep.
That hey, sometimes I may have to move fast, but so long as you know and are willing to kind of dig through the details. And other times I may have the luxury to come to you and say, this is a move I want to make.
Yeah.
And I need you to tell me good, better, best.
Yep, absolutely. And I think where people can start, and if I were to be working with you, one of the first things that I would ask is, what is your number one business objective? Help me understand that. Because that's your 30,000-foot vision right there. Like, car dealers, they sell cars. That's their number one business objective. You have a nutrition company. Your number one business objective is to sell your product, right? Yep. And if anything that's happening that doesn't align with that, it's not a fit. And it's going to turn you off as the CEO. Yeah. And I'm sure you've had some of those suggestions.
Yeah. Well, especially when you look at most, not all, but most kind of type A, high-speed CEOs, everything is a battle to me. Everything is a battle to us. Mm-hmm. Everything is a war. So if there's a battle or a war, it's only two sides. You're either on my side or the enemy's side.
Right.
And so if something looks to me like you are slowing down my number one objective, mm-hmm. you are no longer on my side, in my mind.
Right.
And so that's where that communication is important. That's where all the stuff, sitting down together and working through the problem is important. The old me would just say, you obviously don't give two craps about my business and you're just trying to be the HR pro, so peace out.
Right.
Right. The newer me, I've learned that I can be an eagle, but I have to step into a dove and a owl shoes at times and look through that lens.
Yeah.
But I think that also comes with some wisdom with age. I'm 46 now. At 36, I was just shooting off the hip, right? So, I mean, how do you manage a younger CEO who's on fire? Like, I would hate to be the HR person of a younger, driven CEO.
I would too.
Seriously.
Like, serious
like, oh my God, this person's going to put me in the grave, right?
I don't blame you. I wouldn't mind it. I would be like, oh, this may not
Maybe
go
just
over
demand
very
more
well.
money. Like if I was in HR, I'd just like, you're going to pay me double what, if you're in your 30s, you're paying me double what I'm supposed to be getting paid. And once you're in your 40s, let's go to the normal.
That's right. Yeah. Once you get to my age. Yeah. But I actually had that incident. I worked with a COO. And although he said that HR was very important, anytime he would communicate, I tell him, it's like, listen, I got a laundry list. He would always walk into my office 15 minutes before I left. And I finally told him, I said, this is not working. And I kind of had to get into his face a little bit about it. And I didn't want to, but I had to. I said, this isn't working. I need you earlier in the day because from the time that I saw you at 9 o'clock to 4:15 or 4:45 or whatever it is, and I'm on my way to go teach a class, I can't do anything, and then tomorrow it's going to be more of the same kind of a thing. So, that's just an example of commitment behind that communication. And it's like, I can't pencil whip this stuff through. It's very complex. And we were government contractors at a time working at a space agency. So he's a nice guy. He's a great guy. But I wasn't at that top of that list. Not me personally, but the function.
The function of HR.
Right,
and,
exactly.
And that's exactly it. And so much of it is that because I will prioritize what matters to me and do that at 9 a.m., 8 a.m., 7 a.m., and I will kick down the road what doesn't matter to me.
Yeah.
And I do, with all due respect, think that the HR position is also a sales job.
Totally.
Now, having seen what you guys do,
completely,
I believe that the HR pro has a duty and an obligation to sell themselves on the CEO and say, look, I'm on your team. I'm the person that stops the periodic injuries. Like if you're an athlete, I stop the periodic injuries that make us go 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. If you're a race car, I make sure you're perfectly tuned so that we have the best, highest octane gas and best tires on it so that you don't have to make a lot of pit stops. And if I'm so and by the way, some of the best leaders and CEOs are great sellers. And if you're a great salesperson, then you love to be sold. And if you can sell me on why I do need to use a little more precaution before shooting off the hip, then I'm going to see you as an ally, and now you become a priority, and not just a 4:45. Let me swing by your office. And go, hey, here's what I did, and here's what I need you to fix. Bye.
Right, exactly. And and that also takes time too, because like you said, it's the individual in their self-development, right? Mm-hmm. HR people can't fix culture on our own. We can't fix those things. We can't fix the direction of your vision in a snap. We have to work at it, and it is hard. It can be really hard.
Sure.
There's a couple of things that I think are important to call out. Number one, you as a CEO, you own every problem in the business, every single one. Even though you're not the one dealing with it, you own it. It's extreme ownership. The second is that your people problems are very different than our people problems or your mid-manager people problems. And your process, how you see process problems, are very different as well.
True. Yeah.
Your process problems are going to be, if this process isn't working, this is a bottleneck in profit and revenue, or revenue, period. And ultimately what happens is that prohibits me from keeping the doors open to pay people and do benefits and deal with the business, the people side of the business. So if HR pros aren't sitting there understanding the number one business objective, they're not asking questions about what are your people issues and what are your process issues, and then figure out together how HR supports that, it's going to be a lot of that dynamic that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Because there's no clarity involved, right? So there's a lot of stuff that's coming down the pike right now. We've got a new administrator, we got a new president in office. His agenda is drastically different, and this happens all the time.
By the way, I've got a question.
Yeah.
If Joe Biden is the president now, and when Trump was the president, who's their HR? Like, who's the country's, honestly, like, I'm not being a wise guy, like, who's the country's
No, they're
HR?
attorneys.
Is that who? Okay.
Yeah, it's going to be their attorneys. That's a good question. Yeah.
Right,
so,
because I mean, the country's a company, and we should be running it profitable, which we're not. A whole other story. But there's got to be someone in charge of the people.
There's going to be somebody in charge. There's going to be an arm of HR at the White House, absolutely, right? But that's going to be HR for the staff. This is the Grand Poobah, right?
Right.
There's no firing of the Grand Poobah.
Right.
And there's only so much control, and we know it's very political. We've seen the movies, and you can make up and imagine whatever you want. Back in 2017, I had a very rare opportunity to go to the Capitol and actually advocate for the removal of the Cadillac tax under the Affordable Care Act. And the Cadillac tax was, if companies want to provide their employees with a very high-level plan, a rich plan to stay, competitive, or give their employees the best, regardless of whether they paid for it at 80%, 90%, 95%, 100%, whatever, there was going to be, in 2019, a 40% tax excised on top of that cost.
Thanks.
So if you're dealing with a $1.6 million benefit, add on 40%, that'll drive business out the door. I mean, companies will shut down for stuff like that, and it's bad. So I got an opportunity to actually go up and advocate, sat down with the senators and their aides, I happened to know the congressman, the House of Representatives. 2 years later, it got removed. It was under the Trump administration. It was moved. So that's kind of a neat thing to be able to do something like that. It was really that was pretty
really
awesome.
Impactful, yeah.
It was, and it wasn't by no means just me. Obviously, I was with a contingent. This is something that was worked on by lobbyists for a while, and then under the last administration, it got removed. Every president that comes in has 18 months to actually get their agenda out, and this president specifically has a 100-day agenda that is absolutely fierce. And he is a very strong pro-employee president, pro-labor president. We've also got the complexities mixed in with the coronavirus, COVID-19, and the vaccines. So the things that we should be expecting as businesses within the first 100 days is that he is going to advocate, and he will, I have every confidence in the world this will happen, he is going to push for $15 minimum wage, all right? He can do that, first off, by launching an executive order and pushing that down to government contracts, because his executive power permits him to do that. So that's only like maybe 2% of the companies in the business that takes place in the United States. So if you look at business as a whole, about 49% is small business, 51% is large, and of the 49, 23% are single proprietors, right? Single owners, right? Your solopreneurs. Of the 49%, I think it's about 2%. I have yet to figure out that exact number, but it's very, very marginal for federal contractors, and that's a place that I play in as well. So they can put that on, and there's way more compliance on government contracting, and it can potentially open up opportunity to come into public space and public law, like fire departments, police departments, public utilities, and also into private companies like yours. So if they find that it works over in the government contracting area, their little sister organizations like the Department of Labor say, hey, you know what, that's a good thing. Let's go focus over here.
Right.
Not uncommon, and that's what happened with pay data. And then now we've got states that are now opening up. So California has pay data and pay data reporting, right? It's a really good example. New York City already has that. That doesn't even have anything to do with government contracting. So other states are now starting to adapt and adopt these different types of things. What does that do for you? It opens up a lot of opportunity for people to understand what your competitive rates are. Do you have any violations in there? In other words, do you have any disparity between people? And that's when I need to come to you and say, hey, people issue time. This is what we've got coming down the pike. So we've got minimum wage, we've got the vaccine, and right now, a lot of people are not aware of this, but the federal government is on a policy freeze. So they're reviewing a lot of the employment laws right now, or not laws, but employment policy, to figure out how to move forward. A lot of these executive orders, everything's on hold right at the moment. So they're going through this mass review, and I've never ever seen this before. And what they're looking for is opportunities to make shift to meet whatever agenda that they're focused in on, whether it's good, well, we think it's good, bad, or indifferent, this is what they're doing. And ultimately, they'll wind up putting that out. One of the things that is problematic is, this is like my number one rule of thumb in government contracting. The same body of government that tells you that you have to follow this law is the same body of government that's going to put you in a position to violate it, right? Now let's take a look at the vaccine. So we already talked about discrimination, religion, right? We already talked about that stuff. Now we've got OSHA who's coming in, and now they're starting to say, well, you have to do this, this, and this, and other areas of the government are now starting to say, yeah, but that's in conflict. You know, OSHA is saying we have to keep your company safe, but yet you can't discriminate against, like, how do you do this? They're starting to overlap, and now the states are starting to put out their own regulations. They are not playing together, and it gets very complex.
That'll be fun.
And very, very expensive on top of it. Very, very expensive.
Well, you know the key to that.
Make more money.
Yeah, you make more money by making your products more expensive, and then you pay your employees less.
Exactly.
And then what you have in the middle is your profit.
Yeah. And
I'm kidding.
But that's a formula
you do
that
make
does
more.
happen.
It does actually.
It does.
It does, and that is what's going to happen because employers are way too wily to get screwed. In other words, there's no way that I'm going to work harder and make less money.
Absolutely.
I'm going to find a way to lower maybe it's like currently in our company. If things get so bad, why wouldn't I take the 21 days of PTO, paid time off, and bring it down to 2? Mm-hmm. And then why wouldn't I take away the high quality health insurance, health benefits, and bring a lower quality in? Why wouldn't I raise the prices of my products? Why wouldn't I lower pay? And you do these in certain areas, and you go, oh, look at that. I'm still complying, but the people suffering are my customers and my employees.
That's right.
And sadly, that's typically what happens. And that's really what happened when we started shipping things and getting things made in Taiwan and China, et cetera, because we just didn't want to pay the employee wages out here and deal with the litigations that came with that, which is really unfortunate.
And what's also unfortunate is that all of these changes that I just mentioned are coming down at 100% cost to the employer. There's no benefit, there's no break. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act, that ended in December 31st, right? That is one of the only things where a company can actually get a dollar for dollar tax credit. Now, we talk about increasing minimum wage. Well, what happens if your price points aren't priced well? To compensate for that, then we have your formula that starts kicking in. You have to reevaluate, right? You have to take something away in order to increase somewhere else for viability. And there's just so many different things that are going to come out of this. One of the things that I saw that they're talking about with OSHA is actually requiring companies to potentially provide time off. That Maryland is actually working on that. Mandate it. Just as 3 days of bereavement, there's no such thing out there for that right now. You know, how would I be able to walk and say, "Hey, Bedros, guess what? We need to do bereavement pay, and here's the numbers." You're gonna look at me like, "You have 3 heads. Like, what does the matter with you?
Crazy,
if I don't sell this to you, right?" And it's hard, and it's going to continue to get even more complex because right now, it's our environment is very much a what's in it for us, and it's. In my opinion, it's being pushed out in the eyes of how do we protect our employees, but there's so many different agendas out right now. And you have to keep your eye on the ball. You absolutely have to. I mentioned earlier about OSHA. OSHA, I read up that they are looking at possibly requiring companies to provide some form of reimbursement. Now, we don't know what that is. This is just chatter. The bill is in the process of being put together, or the guidelines, I should say. If that's the case, that could violate with the Affordable Care Act, which no longer permits you to do that, and companies get fined every single day that they do it. So again, there's that conflict that's going to take place.
Fun times ahead.
I'm saying, right?
Fun times ahead, yep.
So what are you seeing coming down the pike as far as, I mean, you're in California, you've got a lot of things going on here. What are some of the things, if you were a newbie starting over again, that wish you could do it differently, what would you do?
Well, I think in many ways a newbie has a lot of great advantages because you don't have all this baggage of understanding. And so a newbie is, I almost look at it as, I'm like an established cruise ship. And if a cruise ship is going in one direction and it realizes it has to go the other way, it's going to take many hours, 1 degree at a time, to go the other way. Whereas you look at a speedboat, I can just whip around and go the other way the moment it realizes it's going the wrong way. And I say that because when you're not established, when you're a newbie coming into the entrepreneurial space, you're really not looking at HR and hiring practices and all that stuff. Like, I remember I hired people as 1099 employees when I didn't know any better. They should have been actual employees, not 1099 independent contractors, right? It wasn't because I was trying to be malicious. And quite honestly, back then, when that was my first and second employee, no one was going to come and get me. No one was going to come and find me. I wasn't a big fish, right? Today, if I did that, and if I did it, it would be knowingly, because I know better, it's a different story. It's a different story. So I think the new entrepreneur still has a lot of great opportunity. And I think, look, existing entrepreneurs, big entrepreneurs, I have lots of great opportunity. We can always work around any limitation that we're given, because the human psyche is, one, there's a lot of creativity, and two, is very resilient. So I can overcome anything. And it doesn't matter if I have to overcome federal or state regulations. And I'm not saying by breaking the laws, it's just, again, I can find creative ways to increase the price points of my product, to lower operational costs. But it sucks.
Yeah.
It sucks because you don't become an entrepreneur because, hey, I want to, see if I can cut someone's pay and their paid time off and lower their 401k and all these health benefits, et cetera. You become an entrepreneur because you want to help people and you've got this vision. It's going to make the world a better place. But as the regulations start tightening up, you soon realize that, no, it's a very different playing field.
Yeah.
And as long as you understand the rules of the game, you can play it. Since we have a mutual friend in common, Jason Redmond.
Absolutely.
Right? Former Navy SEAL, retired Navy SEAL. He explained to me how just during his season, during the Iraq and Afghanistan war, how the rules of engagement changed and got tougher and tougher and tougher to a point where now, not only, if I know he's a bad guy but he doesn't have a rifle, I can't shoot him. If he picks up that rifle, it used to be that I can. Now he can pick up the rifle and he has to take the first shot at us. Now I can shoot him. So the rules, but he's like, he goes, B, the good news is they were still bad shots. And so when they took the shot, right? When they took the shot,
Jason.
Yeah, they missed. That gave us a green light to kill him.
Yeah, exactly.
So as long as he understood the rules of the game, they still win.
Absolutely.
And that's how the entrepreneur operates. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's funny. That is absolutely Jason all the way right there. Yeah. And Will and all the other guys that we know. That's pretty awesome. One of the things that I find interesting is that even though sometimes when people know the rules of engagement, they may know the expectation, we're still human beings. And we have this little person here and this little person here. It's your angel and your devil. And they don't always play nice. And my number one live and die rule in life is that in the absence of information, people make stuff up. We as humans we're not comfortable with ambiguity. We're not comfortable. We have to justify everything. And if you don't believe me, watch a young person date. And you'll see it all come out. But when you make a course correction, you make a change, or you may not have communicated something on the HR side of it. And I think this is a really great avenue to go down, because I think from your perspective, like what advice you would give to a HR person to open up communication to a CEO. What would you have preferred when you were 36 years old and shooting from the hip?
Sure.
To prevent somebody from taking on that narrative. It's just like, oh, he's being such a jerk, and I can't believe he's doing this, and he wants to get me fired. And just because there's no communication, what kind of tips would you give an HR person to be able to say, I need you to come talk to me, but this is how I need you to do it. Because they don't have a lot of courage doing that.
They don't, and I think it comes from several places. So one, they have to develop that confidence muscle, right? Have the confidence to walk up to your CEO or whoever is in charge and say, we need to have a conversation, or that conversation is going to have to happen. Like, it can't just be a standing, because I also know this about me: if I don't value what you do in my company, we're probably just going to have a quick tell me now conversation, standing here, whatever. Hey, we might have to set up an hour or two in the conference room to meet tomorrow. How's that work for you? So just do that. Have the confidence to voice that. Number two, don't just assume that the person's too busy. I'm always busy. There's never going to be time in my schedule.
Right.
If you're waiting for my schedule to lighten up, guess what? You're never going to have that
That's never
conversation.
gonna happen.
Yeah. So just find your way into my schedule, and don't just go, I thought you were busy and you didn't want to talk. Find your way into the person's schedule. Number three, sell me. Going back to what we said, understand what it is that I want most. I want to have the most Fit Body Bootcamp locations possible across the United States and Canada and Europe, blah, blah, blah. Great. How can I help you do that, Bedros? I think I can help you do that where the human resources are concerned, but let's both be on the same page where the vision, mission, day-to-day actions are concerned. You're probably the type of CEO that's going to have an intuition, right? Because I operate a lot of intuition. I'm good with that this person's not a good fit for us. Why do we need to go through the 3 strikes? Might as well just part with them now and onward with the new person. And so, just so you know, we do have to give them 3 strikes because we're in California. Like, explain the rules of the game to me. Yeah. I don't know California's rules. If I actually had to gather all the rules of the game from federal to state to municipality, I don't know that. So, like, take the time to educate me, but let me know that you're on my team.
Yeah, exactly.
It goes back to communication. Sell me on the idea why you're actually going to help me achieve my outcome faster. And don't be afraid with the little friction. We have these meetings every Tuesday called the L10 meeting in my office. Level 10 meeting is from EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. I think every company should be running their business off EOS, and they should all read the book Traction that kind of tells you what it's about. But at the end of an L10 meeting, the integrator, the person who's in charge of kind of keeping the 90-minute meeting on track, goes around and goes, all right, rate the meeting 1 through 10. And whenever we have a bit of a blowout in there and there's friction, I'm always rating it a 9.9 or a 10. Most other people for a while, like, oh, it's a 7. It was an 8. I'm like, hey guys, why is it that like your 7s and 8s are my 9s and 10s and your 9s and 10s are my 7s and 8s? I like friction. I think conflict does create clarity. So it's okay to have a little conflict with your CEOs.
Conflict.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying let's throw chairs around at each other, but I am saying that we ought to consider like having a little pushback either way to acid test an idea. Acid test I want to acid test my HR person's commitment to their, so like, hey, tell me why we ought to do that. Well, how much is it going to cost me? Well, I don't know what it's going to cost me. Well, go figure it out. How come you didn't come in here figuring it out? I'm going to talk to you like that. It doesn't mean that you're an a-hole. It just simply means that next time,
be ready.
If you're going to try and sell me an idea, you better have you better anticipate all the questions that I'm going to have, right? Because then the perception on my end might be that you're unprepared.
Right, exactly.
And if you're unprepared, do you really care for my business, right?
Yeah.
Or
do you really have my back?
Or do you really have my back?
That's a big one. Every CEO needs to feel like the HR has their back.
Yeah. And so to that point, I think there is an obligation on the side of the HR person to go to the most bullheaded, conflict-driven CEO and go, hey, I need to talk to you, and it can't just be in the passing moment. It has to be an hour meeting, and I need your full attention, so you can't be here. I've been known to be here while you're talking to me. My daughter has a really good job. She kind of grabs my face and tilts it up, and she goes, hey, Dad, right? And, oh, I learned my lesson.
Yeah.
And I sometimes wish my team members would do that.
Yeah.
Because information is coming at me from 20 different directions.
Yep.
And for me to survive all that, I might have to try and listen while I'm here. But I realize that you want my full attention. Ask me, Bedros, can you put that down for a moment? Sure.
Yep.
Sure. But you have to have the confidence and the balls to do that. If not, I'm just going to steamroll over you, because that's what a driver does. And if you're an eagle and a dove, you want the driver. Otherwise, we're going to have the most perfect product that's never going to be sold.
Yep. Absolutely. And and it just doesn't work. I mean, if you can't stop somebody in their tracks and just say, hey, listen, we need to look at the fail points on this. And that's something that they do in the SEAL teams. They actively engage in finding the fail points. What are the fail points? And, what you were just talking about reminds me, I've told this a couple times but I've never really told it to this degree. So years ago, I had a client who had a near stabbing that took place. And so it was a very fast-moving event. Short version of the story, we had 2 employees. They met at the time clock. One I called the offender, the other one I called the instigator. The instigator came up, dropped an F-bomb and a couple other things, and the offender got really ticked off. They went their separate ways, 2 completely separate buildings. The instigator came back to the offender, gave him kind of like a little mental and ego nudgy, right? Mm-hmm. And next thing you know it, the offender stood up, grabbed the company's utility knife, held it up to his face. He says, if you do that again, I am going to slit you from ear to ear. What people didn't know, he was a prior police officer who was physically trained to manipulate and handle that kind of situation. My phone's blowing up. I'm 3.5 hours away at a meeting. My phone's blowing up. I said, excuse me, I apologize, I need to get this. Clearly it's important. They tell me what's happening. I said, where are they right now? Well, they're in separate buildings. I said, good, you keep them in separate buildings. I said, I want you to call the police, and I want this guy professionally removed. I'm just a consultant, and I'm telling them what to do, right? I said, he needs to be professionally removed. And the CEOs, he's a very good friend of mine today still, and he said, great, I'm going to go on the floor. I said, no, you're not. You and I are going to stay up. You have a senior HR person, you have an executive VP of manufacturing. They can handle that environment. That's their job. We need to keep you away, because the last thing I need you is on the witness stand of a case if this thing goes sideways. You and I are going to sit and figure out the appropriate response. Do we need to bring in the EAP? And all the time that this is going in, it's disrupting business, right? We can't get product out. Orders are being delayed. People are being paid. So I'm watching in my head all these numbers, and then I'm thinking, well, oh my gosh, what happens if this goes sideways? And now we have a liability insurance issue. Like, all these things are just coming at you to make these decisions. But the most important thing was, what is your response as the CEO? That's key right now. Yeah. And that's how you stop the freight train from moving forward. And that's when I realized that, you know what, there's a lot of crisis management in this as well. And we had a great response. We brought into the EAP on Monday. The funny thing was, they had like 5 employees out of 135 that wanted to talk. And the big thing that we learned is that some people were upset that they could only take a 30-minute lunch break. So we fixed that too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was about it. So, it gets hairy and it gets dodgy. And the owner of the company came up screaming at us. The next day we were on site, chewing my backside out. And he's like, I could have handled it. You should have just called me. I said, you had been the first one dead. And people are like, oh, I can't believe she just said that to the owner of the company. I'm like, it's the truth. That's my job. Protect you. It's what I got to do. So simmer down.
It's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
And that is, I believe, what's required. Now,
yeah.
I can't imagine in all the HR training that an HR person rep goes through that any of that social skill is taught.
No, that's learned.
Right?
That is learned.
Right. So look how poorly equipped that HR rep goes into an organization against a type A driver.
Exactly.
Holy crap. The odds are stacked against him or her.
Yeah. And those are the people I deal with on a regular basis. Those are the people who are listening to this, and that's why we're having this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So I greatly appreciate it. So what kind of questions do you have for me?
Well, I got to tell you, the only real question that I have for you is, in the process of knowing that you did everything right, because I know a lot of entrepreneurs deal with this, and knowing that you did everything right in parting ways with someone, and let's say they still lawyer up and say that I was wrongfully terminated. And any way I slice, and this has happened to me recently, and I was like, gosh, I wish I could really ask someone to go, if I go back, how could I do things differently? And every way we look at it, we can't figure it out. But we did everything right. In writing that person up, we have a paper trail, et cetera, but they're saying that they were wrongfully terminated. The act of them lawyering up means we had to lawyer up, so it's costed us money. And if we go to arbitration or mediation, it's going to cost us money. If we let it go to an actual legal battle in the courts, it's going to cost us money. It's obvious that that person isn't paying the lawyer is going to get a chunk of the money if there's a win, right? And so what does an entrepreneur do? What does a business owner do in that point? Because now it's taken up my HR person's time, it's taken up my attorney's time, it's costing me money, it's taken up my time when it's like, well, let's have a meeting with Bedros. And I'm like, what the fuck did I do wrong? Other than seeing that we tried to correct, we have the paper trail, and then now you're saying that it was a wrongful termination, and because we live in a state like California that's employee friendly,
Yeah.
that could happen. But I imagine there's other states that this could happen in, and what does a person in my shoes do to prevent that for the next time and the next time and the next time?
Yeah, that's a really difficult situation because that is what lives in everybody's head, right? And it lives rent-free, unfortunately. In your situation, you've got the complexity of California, and there's nothing out there that prohibits an employee from filing a claim. Now we've got states that are opening up. Usually people would have to go through the EEOC, Equal Opportunity Commission, if they felt that they were discriminated against or wrongful termination or, whatever, right? Anything protected under Title VII. There's nothing that prevents them to do that, but there is a process in place that actually helps weed through some of those details. And depending on the type of claim that is filed or type of court case that could be filed, the burden of evidence will lie either on one of two parties. It's either going to lie on the party of the employee, where the employee is required to prove that they, yes, in fact, were discriminated against or wrongfully terminated, or, depending on the type of case that they're going to file, means that the employer is responsible. There are times where you have done everything right. You couldn't do it any better, and that's still going to happen. And it is, unfortunately, the cost of doing business. Now, there's a couple of things. So first off, you do have liability insurance, so you can launch that claim. The downside of that, your rates could come up in your renewal. That's a possibility, but that will definitely save your capital and your cash, right? The other piece of it is that attorneys who are pursuing cases like this will only pursue them if they feel there's a real benefit to it. So as you're going through this process, it's very likely, if your documentation is good, if it's solid, if you can demonstrate you have given the employee every opportunity to fix an undesired behavior and move it into a desired behavior, you've got more working on your favor. Unfortunately, you just have to go through the pain of demonstrating it. That's the hard
again,
part.
Everything you've said still costs
money.
Money,
Absolutely.
right?
And time. The good news is that typically that amount of pain is less when you do things right. It doesn't happen as often. You can catch things in advance. But clearly, it sounds like you guys, without knowing the details, it sounds like you had a good strategy in place. It's just, I think
and everything worked out fine, but it's unfortunate that, in fact, in the end, the attorney just blatantly came out and said, look, it's going to cost you guys more if you let this go to court.
Yep.
So do you guys just want to settle for $27,000? Like, no.
Yeah.
And then I just dug in my heels and said, we're not going to settle for anything.
Yeah.
So then it went away. But it still cost me money.
It did.
And I think it ended up costing us about $17,000.
Yep.
There's a lot of things I could have done with that 17 G's.
Yep. You could have put it back into your company, put it back into your people.
Yep.
But what's also a fact too is that, as you progress, you're very successful. You become a bigger target. And that's unfortunately one of the things that comes along with that. Bigger companies become a bigger target. More
Right.
success means a bigger target. And unfortunately, that's the nature of what it is. But yeah, you get to that point, but there's so many businesses out there that won't do what you did. And they won't make that $350 an hour phone call to their employment attorney and say, hey, listen, I need to do this. And next thing you know it, now they're facing a $350,000 lawsuit.
Right.
That's a big mistake.
That's a painful mistake.
That is a very painful mistake.
I agree.
So.
I agree. Yep. Well, I got to tell you, for me, it's been a learning experience, this whole journey as working with HR and working with humans. I really believed that, being naive, I believed that I could bring on people just like me who would be driven and care for this thing, but then you realize, wait a minute, they don't have the same reward if there's a win that I do. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, they won't risk what I'm willing to risk.
Right.
And again, it was a byproduct of being naive. So if there's anything that your listeners could take away from this, it is that when you're a young entrepreneur and you're naive, you think that everyone's going to work at your capacity, at your level of commitment. and they're just going to have an intense amount of focus on your business. And at the end of the day, no one loves your baby like you do.
No, I do not.
No one's going to love your
Yeah.
business like you do. And it was a great lesson to learn for me, and I've learned it and moved on. And to me now, it's one of those things where I've got a great HR rep who we're on the same page, we speak the same language, and things work out fine. And I'm sure we'll have another bump in the road. Like you said, you kind of bake that cost into the business.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if people could find you, people wanted to start following you, to find you and learn more about what you do, how can they do that?
Best place is on Instagram, at bedroskeuilian.com.
Very wonderful. Well, thank you so much for doing this. This
Thank
is
you,
really,
Brenda.
thank you for having me on here.
Yeah,
This
of
is
course.
fantastic. I
Appreciate
really
you coming
appreciate
out.
it.